Anyone else who shows up can come in as we have started, but I want to welcome all of you all who are here by noon for today's Shaftesbury Society meeting. My name is Mitch Kokai. We welcome you to another edition of the Shaftesbury Society. As Tony, Bruno, and I were talking a couple of minutes ago, it's good to have it back to closer to normal with people actually in the room. I think this is the third one we've done in person since we resumed post-COVID Shaftesbury Society. Primary election day, of course, is tomorrow, and we'd like to invite each of you to watch Carolina Journal's primary night election coverage. It's going to be taking place from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. You're going to find it on the Carolina Journal YouTube page or the John Locke Foundation Facebook page. Savannah, will you open the door? Because I think it looks like someone's peeking to come in, and might as well just keep it open for at least a few more minutes while other people linger or wander their way in. So you can watch us on the Carolina Journal YouTube channel or the John Locke Foundation Facebook page. You can also listen on WPTF radio, so 680 AM or 98.5 FM, or on any of the North Carolina News Network radio stations that are carrying Curtis Media Group's coverage. Carolina Journal and Curtis Media Group are working together on that coverage. Carolina Journal's Donna King will be there. Tony Rigsby, the longtime WPTF radio correspondent and voice of the Durham Bulls. If you go to Bulls games, you'll recognize that voice. He'll be participating along with some other special guests during the course of the broadcast. By the end of the evening, we should know most of the matchups for the fall elections for U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, State Senate and House, and then a number of local races up and down the ballot. If there are more than two candidates in a primary and no one gets more than 30% of the vote, the top two contestants could head to a runoff primary election on July 26th. That's also the date for a number of municipal races that are on the ballot this year. So once the dust settles on the primaries, political observers will be turning their attention fully to November. And one of the big questions is, how much do the new election maps tell us about the likelihood of candidates from one major party or the other winning both a particular race and ultimately control of a legislative chamber or the upper hand in the congressional delegation? So that's why we have the experts with us today, and I promise that I'm going to be quiet a few moments and let them get to their presentations. Dr. Andy Jackson is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Much of his day-to-day work involves election analysis, including extensive analysis of the maps that we're using in this 2022 election cycle. In addition to holding a PhD in political science from the University of Nebraska, Andy has taught poli-sci both in North Carolina and internationally, and he's also worked for political campaigns, including, I didn't realize this until I looked on your bio, you were the Iowa political coordinator for a presidential campaign back in the day. You can ask him about that in Q&A if you'd like. Anna Bevan Gravley is executive director of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation. That's a nonpartisan research organization which has a special interest in public policy's impact on the business community. Anna Bevan joined NCFREE in 2019 after working as North Carolina Deputy State Director at Americans for Prosperity, and she has also advanced successful state-based policy campaigns and issue campaigns for AFP, Generation Opportunity, and North Carolina Family Action. Both Andy and Anna Bevan are going to be sharing details of their work analyzing North Carolina election districts, and we're going to start with Andy Jackson.
That is the danger of putting your mic in your money pocket. That'll be okay. Thank you, Mitch. I'm going to cover a few things here. We're going to briefly go over the methodology that we use that goes into the Civitas Partisan Index. And then I'm going to very briefly go over a few races that we think are going to potentially be the most interesting. I don't have the full layout of the CPI. We have that up on our webpage. If anybody needs a link, talk to me afterwards, and we'll make sure we get that link to you where you can see the full listing of all 170 state legislative districts here in North Carolina. So the first thing is, well, why do we even do things like this? And we have several reasons. One, it democratizes, and that should be, it would be normally it'd be a small d, democratize, political knowledge. Obviously, people that are most likely to be tuning in to this today, this event, or people that are really, really interested in politics, especially folks that have either they're running for office or they make a living helping people run for office, they already know a lot of this information. They have a good idea of which districts people are likely to win in, Republican or Democratic. This kind of spreads this out, and of course we're not the only ones. You're going to hear two different measures of state legislative races today. Obviously at the national level, the Cook Report, 538, there's a whole host of these, and this lets kind of ordinary citizens, journalists who maybe don't have a political background, get information that is normally the purview of politicos, people that are kind of insiders. And obviously people pay attention to this stuff. People are interested. Who's likely to win a race in any given district? And the third reason we have here is that it can help save resources in the sense that there are some races where we know who's going to win, or at least, by this time on Wednesday, we know who's going to win, barring some huge cataclysmic event. We know, for example, if you're a state running in the state house in Durham, it's probably going to be the Democrat that wins, for example. But this also lets people know what are the close races, what are the races where maybe they'd want to read a little bit more about, races if they're inclined to make donations to candidates, who might they want to make donations to. And by the way, it's for that reason that sometimes we do get pushback on our numbers when we put these out, because there are people that are thinking, well, my candidate's district, especially if you are somebody working for a candidate or a volunteer, we really think that that district is better for our side than that. And we'll talk a little bit about how we derived at our methodology. So we have kind of a two-step process with this. Over the summer of last year, my colleague Jim Sterling and I started putting data into the districts. We started statewide, but we found a baseline. Now, for our measure, we use the 10 Council of State races: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, all the way down to treasurer. So those are the 10 statewide executive races that we use to form a baseline. And based on those 10 races, we found a statewide baseline of 50.76% Republican. So that's how the state as a whole went based on those races. And as you find out, if you look at different races to form your baselines, you're going to get different results. And then, so we did that for the state, but we also did that for each of the approximately 2,700 precincts in North Carolina. So we were getting all that data, sticking it into each of the precincts in Wake County, each of the precincts in New Hanover County, for all 100 counties, and then we can use that as a basis for comparison later. Now, this is what we did as kind of background. We set that up last summer so that once we got the district information, once the General Assembly passed districts, we could go ahead and enter that data in. So phase 2 was in the fall. Once we had districts, we were able to start assigning precincts to districts. Now, it's easy if a whole county is in a precinct, and this is a good thing about North Carolina, because whenever possible, we try to put whole counties into districts, at least at the state legislative level. If there's a county that's split, then we have to assign individual precincts to each of these districts. It gets a little tougher because sometimes, in order to, for whatever reasons, mainly to get equal population, they will split a precinct. Now, the data only gets down to the precinct level. So once you're splitting a precinct, we basically have to make approximations about how we're going to split those precincts between the two districts. And the easiest way is if, say, 2/3 of a precinct is going into one district, then we'll assign 2/3 of the votes, more or less equally. It adds a little bit of imprecision to the process, but generally it's not a big enough thing to affect the outcome of the race. And I want to give you a quick example of how this methodology would work, and I've decided to pick on North Carolina Senate District 24, and there's a reason for that, as we'll see in a moment. I told you before we had a statewide average of 50.76. In this one, this had an average, if you took all 10 council of state races, put them all together, the Republican average in this district, which is Robeson, Scotland, Hope counties, came out to 50.25. And this is another area where sometimes you run into controversy. So you say, okay, this is a slightly Republican district. Well, we take that additional step because we don't really measure kind of a head-to-head. What we want to see is how does this district compare to the state as a whole? And the state as a whole was 50.76 Republican. So we take that next step of subtracting the baseline from that. In our calculations, negative scores equal a lean Democratic. So this was a minus 0.51, which comes out to just barely. We do have D plus zeros and R plus zeros, but just barely comes out to a D plus 1, which means that this district is slightly more Democratic than North Carolina as a whole, based on the measures that we put in from the 2020 Council of State races. And then we would rate this one as a toss-up, from D1 to R1, and our scale is a toss-up, and we go on to lean, both ways, likely, and safe, and we can talk a little bit more about those scales during Q&A if you wish. Now, a couple of things that are important to know when we do this. The CPI and all of these measures, the Cook Report measure, these are all baseline measurements. These are not predictions. This is kind of the start of making predictions. This is one of the factors that goes into it. And so it doesn't include factors like incumbency, which can be an important, that's worth at least a couple of percentage points. Candidate quality, some people are just better campaigners than other people. The environment in which you're in, for example, this year, a lot of folks are expecting this to be a relatively good year for Republicans. Traditionally, a presidential midterm year, the president's party tends to suffer. And the polling data, the generic polling data shows Republicans up. Last one I saw in North Carolina, close to 10%. I don't expect it to be 10% in November, but that's the trend right now. So there's a whole lot of factors that go into it, and this is one of those factors that help figure out, how well each of the candidates are going to do. So while this is not a predictive model, it can still be highly accurate. And I'll give you an example here. By the way, anybody know this guy? Yeah. I hate him. His name is Danny Britt. He's a state senator from North Carolina. I'll never say that to his face because he could probably beat me up quite easily. His district was the only district that the CPI got wrong in 2020. We rated that as a D plus 3, and he ended up winning that one. But all the other factors were in his favor. He was the incumbent. He is, by reputation, a phenomenal campaigner. People like him. And another thing that I don't think I have this in the plan ceremony, but I'll talk about it now. All these measures tend to be backward looking. So when we were looking at 2020, we're doing the rating, we were doing this on data we got from 2016 and 2018. He happens to represent Robeson County, which, if y'all are keeping up, is rapidly changing. It's gone from about close to 70-30 Democratic at the start of this century, and now it's getting close to 60-40 Republican. The change has been fast, and none of these measures can keep up with that. So there are people that kind of if you add other factors in, you could probably make a better prediction. But if you did nothing but the CPI, and we're not counting the toss-ups because they're toss-ups, but anything that we assigned a rating to, we got everything correct except for Danny Britt's district. We did a little bit worse in 2018 because it was a midterm, but still it was about 94% accurate in that year. So that was our looking back and our methodology. What are we looking at going forward? Now, I'm not going to go into a detailed race by race, but we are going to look at one subset of races. So what we're looking at this year, according to CPI, is that you have kind of a baseline. Because of the environmental factor that I mentioned before, we're actually expecting Republicans will probably carry all of our toss-up seats. Here we have 4 toss-up seats in the Senate, 6 in the House. Republicans will probably, not definitely, but probably sweep those because of those previously mentioned environmental factors, this being a good year for Republicans. So the thing I'm going to tell you right now is I have expectation that we're going to be wrong on several races. The CPI is going to be wrong in several races because of the factors that I've mentioned before, namely this political environment. So I'm expecting Republicans will probably sweep those toss-up races. And so the races to watch, and now I'm rubbing a little bit of soul on our CPI numbers, are going to be the ones that we rate lean Democratic. And I happen to have those up. We'll first take a look at the Senate races here. These are the ones that we rated lean Dem. And let me take a sip here. And you can see, first column is the district. This is our CPI rating. This is the location. If it had more than 3 counties in it, I didn't bother. I just wrote kind of a direction of where it is. And then the candidates. Obviously, the primary is tomorrow, so if there's more than one Democrat or more than one Republican, I put both names. Is anybody a libertarian in the room? Okay, good. I'm not going to offend you. I didn't include any libertarian candidates in this. I just didn't have the room for that. But very briefly, 3 is a D5. I wouldn't be surprised if Bobby, is it Hanig? I'm going to butcher names today. So I apologize for that if anybody's listening and you're a candidate. Hanig? Hanig? Thank you. So Bobby Hanig, I mean, he's reputed to be a good campaigner. This is a part of the state that has been trending Republican up in the northeastern part. If somebody's going to pull it off, it would be him in this year. So despite this being a D5, is definitely a possibility. The incumbent in this area, Ernestine Bazemore, her campaign is in utter disarray. And I don't know her personally, but just looking at her campaign finance reports, they've got non-compliance letters. They haven't filed yet for the first quarter, at least not as of the time I wrote these slides. So she's probably not even going to survive the primary, I would imagine. Next one, D2, just to the north and east of here, that's probably going to be a Barnes win in that one. The Wake County ones are going to be interesting. Sidney Betts has a lot of money, and so that always helps, but she lost her last re-election attempt, and then she was appointed to her current position in the Senate, and this is a still relatively conservative part of the county, down in the southern part of Wake County, Fuquay-Varina, that's where I'm from. So that could still end up being an interesting race, and the one that is northern Wake and Granville is going to be a lot of money spent. It's an open seat, and so that's going to be a big one. This one, Rachel Hunt has her father's name. She has her father's financing connections, so this is going to be a tough one, probably for Republicans to win. How about the House? These are, once again, these are all lean Democrat districts that we expect, and I'm just saying these are ones worth watching. And I'll go through these a little faster here. Let me see if, this one, if you're a Republican, you're probably going to feel pretty good about this one. Cooper Suggs is also having difficulties with doing her campaign finances reports on time, and that's usually not a good sign for a campaign if their basic organization is not working. And she hasn't raised that much money, and that's, oh, by the way, these are all in thousands. So her last available data we were able to find had her at 3,000 for an incumbent. At this point in the campaign, is a really, really small amount of money. This one, Rachel Hunt has her father's name. She has her father's financing connections, so this is going to be a tough one, probably for Republicans to win. How about the House? These are, once again, these are all lean Democrat districts that we expect, and I'm just saying these are ones worth watching. these other ones are also going to be interesting. In Wake County one, this should be another one to watch in 35. That's up in the north. 40 as well. Joe John actually has a surprisingly competitive, at least on the financial front, has a surprisingly competitive primary going on. This one, I think this is probably going to be, in the end, a pretty handily held seat for the incumbent. And our second half here out in the West, Republicans would, I mean, you always like to take out a leader. Robert Reeves is the head of the Democratic caucus, and so Republicans would love to take him out. His district is all of Chatham County plus a little bit of the county slipping my mind, Randolph, a little sliver of Randolph, just to get the population right. So Republicans would love to knock him out. It's going to be hard to knock him out. He's well known in the county. He's got fundage. Guilford, Hardister always runs better than state Republicans, so I'm expecting him to run better than state Republicans this year. And again, considering the environment, he's probably going to survive. Hurtado, that's, and again, going to be, he won, he unseated a Republican to win last time around, so this could again be an interesting one. I'm going to be keeping an eye on this one in Cabarrus County because, what is his name? Brian, I'll say Brian E. He's kind of taken like the Robinson School of campaign works. He had a speech at a school board go viral, and then he decided to run for the state legislature. He's gotten a lot of backing. These are small donations for the most part that he's gotten. This is the kind of district Republicans have to win. This is right up on the the western part of Cabarrus County, just over the line of Charlotte. The Charlotte suburbs are starting to flop over into Cabarrus. If Republicans are going to win, they've got to win these kind of suburban counties if they're going to get a supermajority. And that would be definitely a seat that they would have to pick up. And again, Mecklenburg, there's a couple. These are both down in the southern part. 104, I don't know if any of y'all heard of the Republican wedge in Charlotte. There's this one part kind of going into downtown Charlotte where the Republicans used to kind of dominate. This is like south central Charlotte. This may be, if Republicans win here, it may be the last hurrah that this part of south central Charlotte is trending Democratic, but there may be a final chance for a Republican to pick that one up. And of course, trends can change. And so this is our methodology. This is where we think the races are going to be competitive. And once again, as I've said before, these are districts, all the districts I've listed out here are ones that we had placed as lean Democratic. But because of environmental considerations, because Republicans are ahead on the general ballots on these are the races that we expect will be the difference between Republicans getting just a majority or a supermajority. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
Hi, guys. All right. Okay, so I'm Anna Bevan Gravely with the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, and I'm going to do a little copy-paste of what Andy said. He did a great job of talking about the second piece, the step 2 of methodology and how you calculate. We have a different step 1. So our step 1 includes races from 2014, 2016, and 2020. We use U.S. Senate, President, Governor, and Council of State. So it's a wider range of races. And so our numbers are going to look a little different. And I think that's really good. I'll say that a couple of times as we talk through this presentation. And so the graphic at the top really walks you through how we do our math. Mathing is hard sometimes, so a picture is often helpful. And then so we have categories of strong, competitive, and lean. And And so our competitive is a little broader. It's plus or minus 2, so it'll be D plus 2, R plus 2. And strong is anything with plus 6 or minus 6, so D plus 6, R plus 6, and above. And then lean is between 3 and 5. And so we've talked a lot about lean districts, and that will continue for a couple of reasons. And so when we talk about a rating, whether it's our rating or the CPI, there's something to keep in mind. A lot of people want to use these as crystal balls. It's just not the case. They are descriptive and not predictive. So we look to the past to give an indication, the most amount of indication that we can at this particular time of how those races or how those districts might perform, if they perform on the same level. And so one of the reasons why we use multiple races in multiple years is to sort of increase our depth in the data that we use, because each year has a different profile or portfolio. And so I like to say that our PDI is the largest piece of the puzzle right now. It will become a smaller piece of the puzzle as we start adding more, which is incumbency, candidate viability, fundraising strength, external money. When more money starts flowing into our state, that is a pattern that has been very consistent over the last decade, specifically the latter half of the decade. And then what a rating is not, as we said, not a crystal ball, but it's also not an absolute truth. That's really hard to have in politics, and especially in North Carolina politics. So much can change so fast. And so I'm going to also use Senate District 24 to illustrate some of the differences and some of the data that we produce. And so this is from our website. We have our Partisan District Index dashboard, has a couple of different tabs that seeks to break down and break out information. So this is if you highlight 24 and look at all of the races that I talked to you about, 2014, 2016, and 2020, you can see how the Republican-Democrat breakout is by year that contributes to the overall rating of 24. We have them for all of the districts as well. And then this one, we have, if you remember, the CPI rates Senate District 24 as an D+1. We have it rated as a D+3. And so this view in particular pulls the stat pack, which is the data that's collected, that's used to create these ratings, but specifically isolates the 2020 presidential race and showcases our PDI. If you notice, there's a PDI 2.0. We have a PDI 1.0 as well. The 1.0 is inferred absentee votes, and 2.0 is included. We've seen more absentee votes or vote by mail than we have really ever in our past, and so that greatly impacted 2020 in the election. And so you can see that comparison on our website and what that looks like. So you can toggle between 1.0 and 2.0. And so if you look here, our rating is in orange. The stat pack presidential is in purple, the color purple. And so the presidential rating for 24 is 7 points more Democratic than what we said our PDI is. So it's impacting our PDI in one of the factors as to why we have a D+3 compared to a D+1. And so I'm going to go into a little bit of a broader perspective of our Partisan District Index, or PDI. And so this is the color heat map. The darker the red, the more Republican. The darker the blue, the more Democrat. Makes logical sense. It's nice to walk through, though. And so this is the Senate snapshot, or what I like to affectionately refer to as the side-by-side chart. Very technical. And so we've got our strong Democrat races, our lean Democrat, our competitive lean Republican, and strong Republican. For the sake of focus and energy when it comes to time, energy, and money, taking the strong Democrats and strong Republicans and sort of pushing them off. I don't know if you guys were like me, but I watched the entire Marvel series during COVID. I'm really proud of it. It's one of my greatest accomplishments, really. But in that, I think about this chart when Tony Stark creates a whole new molecule and then pushes things away that he doesn't want to include, and he wants to focus in on something. And so that's what we do with strong Democrats and strong Republicans. We sort of push them away so we can focus in on the lean and competitive. And one of the reasons we do that is Andy talked about, when you have a strong Republican or a strong Democrat district, those district profiles and behavior is more likely to support whether it's a Democrat, a Democrat, strong Republican, a Republican. I will not say that there is no way on earth that someone of another party would win, but the likelihood is very, very, very low. Because again, we don't really want to speak in absolutes here in North Carolina politics. And so when we look at what does November potentially look like on the Senate side? What our current view is, we've got our chart of colors, 22 Dems, 28 Republicans. And based on what I'm seeing, and we'll go into more detail about this, the possibility is very good that Republicans pick up a supermajority. There are two races that are sort of up in the air because we need more time to learn more about the candidates, learn more about how the candidates are interacting with their district. We need some more of those pieces of the pie or pieces of the puzzle. And that's in Senate District 18 and Senate District 4. Senate 4, if you remember from the previous chart, has 2 Democrats running in the primary. One of the reasons why I think this one is going to be particularly interesting is that Buck Newton, who's a former senator, also ran statewide, is running as one of the Republican candidates in this race. And so when we talk about the power of incumbency or name recognition, this is a really interesting year because we've got a lot of re-returns, which is, again, another technical term, of people who are coming back to try to claim their seat, whether they lost or they've previously held office years ago, so you'll kind of remember their names, and then some rematches of straight up copy-paste from 2020. But again, we have a lot of time to go. There's a lot more time in this year. And so looking at the House, very similar heat map status. The darker the red, the more Republican. The darker the blue, the more Democrat. And so this is our snapshot or side-by-side chart for the House. I'm sure you guys are very glad we started with the Senate. It's a lot less to take in and try to absorb. But we're going to do the same thing, strong Democrats off to the side, strong Republicans off to the side, and really focus in on those lean and competitive districts. And so looking at the possibility for November with the House, we have our current status, which is 69 Republican, 51 Democrat. And so looking at this possibility, the Republicans it's looking pretty good for them to get 63 solidly. There are 4 that are up in the air for me, but it's going to take a lot for them to, at this point in time, to get a supermajority. I think the likelihood of them getting a majority is really good, very good. Again, no absolutes, but very good. But I think there's about 6 that I think they probably could get if they flip one and hold on to another, and then there's some that are just up in the air that we need to have some more information on as time goes on. And so I want to talk a little bit about our differences, how our ratings are different. That's one of the biggest questions that I get asked. I don't know if Andy gets asked these questions, but I get asked a lot about our differences. And I think that the differences, particularly this year, highlights a reason to watch a race. So when we look at the Senate race, some comparisons, and these are just key ones that I think are factors within that focus range of competitive and lean. And so there is one more lean Republican race in this, but I took it off for the sake of room. It's Joyce Kravik's race. She went from being one of the most expensive races in 2020 to not having a challenger. Real nice. That was well done. And so when we look at these races in particular, I'm going to point out when we have the NCFREE is green, and LOCK or the CPI is orange. So there are a couple that are pretty strongly different. So we've got R1 to D2 in this 18 race. I think that is something that is a good reason to watch this race. One, it's open, so there's going to be a lot of money in it because it is in a competitive category. And so when you've got two relative unknowns coming at one another, we're going to see a lot of money in this race for sure. And then Sydney Batch's race, we talked about that. That's going to be an interesting race for sure. We have it rated as an R+1, where the CPI has it as a D+2. And then I'm going to pick Hunt's race to highlight just a midge. We have it as an R+0, and they have it as a D+5. I think the greater the difference on these, I think really is something where the presidential races, the U.S. Senate races, really do have an impact on these districts in particular. And so being able to factor in the swing of our indexes helps create a better picture and a fuller story as we move into collecting more of those puzzle pieces or pie pieces. I've mixed that up a couple times, pie and puzzle. I guess I'm hungry. But relatively speaking, our Senate line is not that far off. Where we see a lot of the differences is on the House side. And so on the House side, we've got 9 with Farkas, Gaillard in Nash County. That is where I'm from, Nash County. So I'm kind of excited to get to watch that race. And then Everett, Joe John, I think that's a good one to focus on. Hardister, I think Andy made the point earlier that Hardister runs better than the Republicans typically do, and that's true. I think he's had a lot of time to refine and get really good at the campaign process. He's had some pretty competitive races. And then Hurtado, Lofton, but specifically looking at Hurtado and Farkas, those are two that I think are going to be especially interesting because of the amount of money they received, those particular candidates received in 2020. There was a lot of outside groups that came in to support these candidates. Same thing with Deb Butler and Von Hyfen. Those are going to see, both of those candidates in particular are going to see a lot of outside money from groups like Emily's List, Planned Parenthood, a lot of the big national groups that we've all heard talked about for sure. The open race in 73 I think is especially interesting. We have it rated as an R+5. Civitas or LOCK has it rated as a D+3. That race is going to be very dynamic, one, because of the swing in our ratings, but also because it is wide open. A majority of what we're seeing with these open races is a dynamic swing between the two ratings, which predictions purpose, I think those are going to be much closer calls as we start collecting more information. The second quarter report comes in, we start seeing some outside groups and their endorsements, and whether any IEs pop up to start supporting them, but definitely PAC money will play a huge role in a lot of these open races. So that sort of brings me to like a pause point where I guess we can open it up to questions.